What we don't want is what seems to be overly aggressive, poorly executed trawling expeditions where 5-year-olds and grandmothers and people of mistaken identity and people in Target parking lots aren't getting the shit kicked out of them in an effort to satisfy Stephen Miller's bloodlust and his quotas.
Yes, we really looked at what has changed with ICE enforcement leading up to this and the marching orders that they're getting from the White House. Stephen Miller, as you mentioned earlier, had this meeting in late May where he told agents from around the country that not enough people were being deported and that their focus should not be on criminals and on the target list that they've traditionally used, but on just going out and finding anyone who's in the country illegally and deporting them. And he said, why don't you try Home Depot and why don't you try 7-Eleven?
It's always going to be like this, right? When you look at the numbers during the campaign, the sheer number of immigrants that they were claiming that they were going to deport, you were never going to be able to get to that number by arresting the worst of the worst, right? Because to get the worst of the worst, those are the people who are not showing up for court hearings, right? Those are the people who are in hiding. And so it takes investigation, it takes resources, it takes 8 to 10 man teams to go out and track these people down and arrest them. And so what you saw is very early on, you saw Stephen Miller's, there's a sort of infamous reported meeting that he had where he was screaming at people and saying, we need to be raiding Home Depot parking lots. We need to be casting these wide nets in the community. And the other thing that I think is really, the really damning thing is, for a long time, ICE prioritized the worst of the worst. Like that was who we directed our resources at. And that makes perfect sense. When Trump took office in 2016, one of the first things he did was deprioritize going after the worst of the worst and prioritize going after migrants. So people who were here seeking asylum, people who didn't have a criminal record.
What's up, everybody? Major Retired Richard Ojeda here. And between Rosie O'Donnell, Stephen Colbert, Jon Stewart, and even South Park, it's starting to feel like comedians are doing the job that a lot of the mainstream political establishment forgot how to do, calling out power when it's abusing people.
And so they aren't targeting the worst of the worst. They are going out and getting whoever they can, wherever they can. They're going to places where, every stereotypical kind of racist asshole thinks all the illegals are, right? Those are the places where they're going.
And they're doing it very disingenuously. I mean, the idea that, and if you question it, they really do say, oh, so I guess you want rape, like as though it is a binary.
Because when you strip away the talking points and the propaganda, comedy has a way of getting right to the truth. And that's exactly what happened when Jon Stewart took a look at the Trump administration's immigration crackdown and the role. Stephen Miller has been playing behind the scenes, not just as a spokesman, but as the guy pushing the whole operation towards something colder, meaner, and more theatrical.
But we lay out in the story a number of things that have changed operationally at ICE. For different reasons, some directives from above and some things that have just changed sort of on a grassroots level on the ground. And that includes agents no longer needing to stick to their targets, being able to arrest anyone they encounter, being able to arrest people in sensitive locations like courtrooms, schools, hospitals. We're seeing them frequently do masked arrests now. And really using these splashy shows of force.
For months, the line coming from Trump and his allies has been the same. They're going after the worst of the worst, dangerous criminals, violent offenders, people who supposedly threaten public safety. That's the justification they used every time someone questioned their immigration policies. But when you actually look at the numbers they promised during the campaign, millions of deportations, you start to realize something doesn't add up. If you're actually targeting serious criminals hiding from the law, it takes time. Investigations, warrants, surveillance, teams of agents tracking someone down for weeks or months. You don't stumble across those people while driving around the neighborhood. And that's exactly the point Stewart was drilling into.
What has so, I think, stunned the nation, besides the thing, is the blatant lying. I mean, technology is a two-way street. Now that we have all this surveillance and video, but now we also see the citizens surveilling and the citizens catching video that absolutely disprove the narratives that are being put out by the government.
Yeah, and I mean, that clearly applies to both of these shootings, right? Where civilians and witnesses have been filming on their own mobile phones and doing their own form of surveillance. And I don't really want to think about what would happen if we didn't have those cameras in everybody's hands. They're clearly a very, very good thing. That said, the flip side, when ICE officers or Customs and Border Protection officials use their own cameras, they have this facial recognition app on there, which even gets stuff wrong.
If your political promise is to deport millions of people, you're never going to reach that number by chasing violent criminals who are actively avoiding law enforcement. The math simply doesn't work. So the question becomes obvious. How do you hit those massive numbers? The answer, according to the reporting that's now coming out, is that you don't focus on the worst criminals at all. You focus on whoever is easiest to grab. And that's where Stephen Miller comes in. There's reporting that Miller had a meeting with immigration officials where he made it clear the mission had changed. Instead of focusing on criminal targets, the list ICE traditionally worked for them, agents were told to cast a wider net. Anywhere you can, however you can. And Miller reportedly even suggested the kinds of places agents should start looking. Home Depot parking lots, 7-Eleven, places where day laborers gather looking for work. And sure enough, soon after, that's exactly where agents begin showing up. That's the part that exposes the whole thing for what it really is. Because this was never about the worst of the worst. That this was a sales pitch, the slogan, the thing you say on television so voters feel like the policy is about safety. But when the policy actually hits the streets, it looks very different. Suddenly, agents are conducting mass arrests. They're showing up at courtrooms where migrants are literally appearing for their scheduled hearings. They're picking people up in neighborhoods, workplaces, parking lots, people with no criminal history, people who were doing exactly what the law asked them to do. And the tactics themselves are getting more aggressive. Federal agents making warrantless arrests, masked officers taking people into custody without identifying themselves, armed tactical teams surrounding homes, military vehicles rolling into suburban neighborhoods for a single arrest. In one case, a father with no criminal history had his home surrounded by agents carrying rifles and shields. In another case, a convoy of vehicles rolled into a quiet California neighborhood, not even to arrest an undocumented migrant, but to question someone whose son had been handing out flyers warning neighbors that ICE agents were nearby. Think about that for a second. That's the level of escalation that we are talking about. And what's even more striking is they're not hiding any of it. They're posting the videos themselves. Raids, smashed car windows, armed agents surrounding people in public spaces, because the spectacle is a strategy. This isn't quiet police work. It's designed to be seen. And there's a reason for that. The goal isn't just deportations. The goal is fear. When you create these kind of high-profile raids, when you send armored vehicles into neighborhoods and blast the footage online, you're sending a message, not just to the people being arrested, but to everyone watching. You're telling them life here can become unpredictable, dangerous, unstable. Maybe it's safer not to come. Maybe it's safer to just leave. That's the real strategy behind the spectacle. And the administration keeps insisting the American people shouldn't believe what they're seeing. They say the media is exaggerating, that critics are spreading misinformation, that this is all about protecting communities. The administration says they're targeting violent criminals. The videos show agents sweeping up whoever they can. And that's why the story is falling apart. Because once people see the gap between the rhetoric and the reality, the talking points stop sounding convincing. What's emerging instead is something much simpler, a quota system. When politicians promise massive numbers, millions of deportations, they create pressure for agencies to deliver those numbers. And when those numbers become the priority, the easiest targets become the fastest way to hit the goal. Not the dangerous criminals hiding from the law, the people standing in a parking lot looking for a day's work, the people showing up to court hearings, the people who assumed that following the rules would keep them safe. That's the reality behind Stephen Miller's strategy. And once you see it clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee. Because this isn't really about immigration enforcement anymore. What we've been watching now is something different. It's a spectacle, a political performance built on intimidation, numbers, and fear. And that's why this whole conversation about what Jon Stewart called Stephen Miller's bloodlust matters. Because policies built on cruelty and intimidation eventually run into something they can't control: sunlight. And if this country wants a way out of that kind of politics, the answer isn't more intimidation and spectacle. The answer is getting beyond an administration that thinks fear is a governing strategy. Because in a democracy, power doesn't belong to the people holding the guns. It belongs to the people holding the cameras. And that is an absolute fact. Sappers clear the way, airborne all the way.